You ever notice something strange? Some of the smartest people you know still get laid off, not the lazy ones, not the ones who barely show up, the sharp ones, the reliable ones, the ones everyone goes to when something breaks, and when it happens, it messes with your head, because we're taught something growing up. Work hard, be valuable. Be smart, be indispensable, and you'll be safe. But real life doesn't always work like that. So let's talk about it. Why do smart, capable, high-performing people still lose their jobs? And what does that say about the system we're all operating in? First, we need to separate something. Layoffs are not the same as being fired. Being fired is personal. Layoffs are structural. That distinction matters. When someone is laid off, it often has nothing to do with intelligence, work ethic, or even performance. It has to do with math, and math doesn't care how smart you are. Imagine a company looking at a spreadsheet. They're not seeing personalities. They're seeing departments, budgets, margins, projections, maybe revenue slowed, maybe investors expect higher profits, maybe the company wants to boost its stock price before the next earnings call. So leadership asks, where can we cut costs quickly? And the biggest expense in most companies? People. Now here's the hard truth. You can be brilliant, but if your department gets cut, you go with it. It's not about you. It's about the structure around you. And that's the first painful lesson. Competence does not override corporate strategy. There's another layer, timing. You can be excellent at your job, but if you were hired during a growth phase and now the company is shrinking, you're suddenly part of overexpansion, not because you failed, but because the company miscalculated. During boom times, companies hire aggressively. They assume growth will continue. When it slows, they correct, and the correction often hits people who did nothing wrong. That's not incompetence. That's corporate mood swings. Now let's talk about something deeper. Being smart at your job is not the same as being strategically positioned. Some roles are revenue generating. Some roles are cost centers. If you directly bring in money, you're often safer. If your role supports operations but doesn't clearly tie to revenue, you're more vulnerable. That doesn't mean you're less intelligent. It means your value is harder to quantify. And in uncertain times, companies prioritize what they can measure easily. It's easier to defend a salesperson who brings in $5 million. Harder to defend someone whose contribution is indirect, even if it's essential. That's uncomfortable, but it's real. There's also something people rarely admit. Layoffs can be political. Sometimes entire teams are cut because a new executive wants to reshape the company. New leadership often means new vision, and new vision sometimes means removing people tied to the old one. You could be incredibly capable, but if you're aligned with the previous strategy, you might be seen as part of the past. Again, not personal, structural, and then there's perception. This one is subtle. You can be smart, but if leadership doesn't see your impact, if your work is invisible, if you're not advocating for yourself, you might be viewed as non-essential, not because you aren't, but because visibility matters in corporate environments. Sometimes the loud contributor survives over the quiet genius, not because they're better, but because they're seen. That's a hard pill to swallow for a lot of intelligent people, because many smart people assume, my work will speak for itself. In reality, it often doesn't. Now I want to say something that might sting a little. Being smart can actually create blind spots. Smart people sometimes believe the system is rational. They assume, if I perform well, I'll be rewarded. But corporations are not pure meritocracies. They're ecosystems of incentives, shareholders, executives, quarterly targets, market pressure. Those forces don't always align with fairness. And when smart people discover that, it feels like betrayal, because the promise they believed in wasn't fully real. Let's also talk about scale. In a small company, individual brilliance stands out. In a massive corporation with 10,000 employees, you're one node in a machine. Even high performers can be statistically absorbed. When leadership cuts 8% of staff, they're not evaluating each soul individually, they're hitting a target number. It's impersonal, and that impersonality is what makes it hurt. Because when you've poured your identity into your work, you expect it to mean something permanent, but corporations are designed to adapt, not to attach. So what does this mean? It doesn't mean intelligence is useless. It doesn't mean effort doesn't matter. It means job security isn't purely about being smart. It's about leverage. It's about positioning. It's about adaptability. And sometimes it's just about timing, which is frustrating because timing isn't something you can fully control. There's another quiet shift happening right now: AI, automation, efficiency obsession. Companies are under constant pressure to do more with less. That means even high-level roles are being re-evaluated. Not because people are incompetent, but because the definition of necessary is changing. And that creates anxiety, especially for people who did everything right, studied hard, built skills, climbed carefully, only to realize the ground itself can shift. So if you're someone who's been laid off, or afraid you might be, I want you to hear this clearly. It is not always a reflection of your intelligence. It is not always a reflection of your worth. It is often a reflection of incentives you don't see and systems you don't control. That doesn't make it painless, but it makes it understandable. The bigger lesson here isn't work less or don't care. It's this: don't confuse employment with identity. Don't assume performance equals protection. And don't build your entire sense of stability around an institution whose loyalty is conditional. That's not cynicism, that's realism. Smart people still get laid off because companies optimize for survival and growth, not for fairness, not for emotional logic, just survival and growth. And once you understand that, you stop taking structural decisions personally. You start thinking strategically. You build transferable skills. You diversify income if possible. You stay adaptable. Not paranoid, just aware. And maybe that's the uncomfortable truth of modern work. Being smart is powerful, but being adaptable is safer. I'm curious what you think. Do you believe companies are still merit-based? Or have incentives quietly replaced merit? Let me know, because this conversation isn't about fear, it's about clarity. And clarity is power.